I'm reading from Harry Potter, The Goblet of Fire, and I'm going to read from chapter 4, Back to the Burrow. By 12 o'clock the next day, Harry's trunk was packed with his school things and all his most prized possessions. The invisibility cloak he'd inherited from his father, the broomstick he'd got from Sirius, and the enchanted map of Hogwarts that he'd been given by Fred and George Weasley last year. He had emptied his hiding place under the loose floorboard of all the food, double-checked every nook and cranny of his bedroom for forgotten spell books or quills, and taken down the chart on the wall counting the days down to September the 1st, on which he'd like to cross off the days remaining until his return to Hogwarts. The atmosphere inside number 4 Privet Drive was extremely tense. The imminent arrival at their house of an assortment of wizards was making the Dursleys uptight and irritable. Uncle Vernon had looked downright alarmed when Harry had informed him that the Weasleys would be arriving at 5 o'clock the very next day.
"I hope you told them to dress properly, these people,"
he snarled at once.
"I've seen the sort of stuff your lot wear. They'd better have the decency to put on some normal clothing, that's all."
Harry felt a slight sense of foreboding. He had rarely seen Mr. or Mrs. Weasley wearing anything that the Dursleys would call normal. Their children might don no muggle clothing during the holidays, but Mr. and Mrs. Weasley usually long wardrobe robes in varying states of shabbiness. Harry wasn't bothered about what the neighbours would think, but he was anxious about how rude the Dursleys might be to the Weasleys if they turned up looking like the idea of the worst kind of wizard. Uncle Vernon had put on his best suit. Now, to some people, this might have looked like a gesture of welcome, but Harry knew it was because Uncle Vernon had wanted to look impressive and intimidating. Now, Dudley, on the other hand, looked somehow diminished. Now, this was not because the diet was at last taking effect, but due to fright. Dudley had emerged from his last encounter with a fully grown wizard with a curly pigtail poking out from the seat of his trousers, and Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon had to pay for its removal at a private hospital in London. It wasn't altogether surprising, therefore, that Dudley kept running his hand nervously over his backside and walking sideways from room to room so as not to present the same target to the enemy. Lunch was almost a silent affair. Dudley didn't even protest at the food, cottage cheese and grated celery. Aunt Petunia wasn't eating anything at all. Her arms were folded, her lips pursed, and she seemed to be chewing on her tongue, as though biting back the furious diatribe she longed to throw at Harry.
"They'll be driving, of course,"
barked Uncle Vernon across the table. Said Harry. We hadn't thought of that. How were the Weasleys going to pick him up? They didn't have a car anymore. The old Ford Anglia they once owned was currently running wild in the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. But Mr. Weasley had borrowed a Ministry of Magic car last year. Possibly he might do the same today. I think so, said Harry. Uncle Vernon snorted into his moustache. Normally, Uncle Vernon would have asked what car Mr. Weasley drove. He tended to judge the other men on how big and expensive their cars were. But Harry doubted whether Uncle Vernon would have taken to Mr. Weasley even if he'd driven a Ferrari. Harry spent most of the afternoon in his bedroom. He couldn't stand watching Aunt Petunia peer out through the net curtains every few seconds, as though there'd been a warning about an escaped rhinoceros. Finally, at 5:15, Harry went back downstairs, and he went into the living room. Aunt Petunia was impulsively straightening the cushions. Uncle Vernon, well, he was pretending to read the paper, but his tiny eyes weren't moving. And Harry was sure he was listening with all his might for the sound of an approaching car. Dudley was crammed into an armchair, his porky hands beneath him clamped firmly around his bottom. Harry couldn't take the tension. He left the room and went and sat on the stairs in the hall, his eyes on his watch and his heart pumping fast from all the excitement and nerves. But 5 o'clock came and then went. Uncle Vernon, perspiring slightly in his suit, opened the front door, peered up and down the street, and then withdrew his head quickly. "They're late," he snarled at Harry. "I know. Maybe the traffic's bad or something." 5:10, then 5:15. Harry was starting to feel anxious himself now. At 5:30 he heard Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia conversing in terse mutterings in the living room.
"No consideration at all."
"We might have had an engagement. Maybe they'll think they'll get invited to dinner if they're late."
"Well, they most certainly won't,"
said Uncle Vernon, and Harry heard him stand up and start pacing the living room.
"We'll take the boy and go. There'll be no hanging round. That's if they're coming at all. Probably mistaken the day. I dare say their kind don't set much store by punctuality. Either that or they drive some tin pot car that's broken down." "Ah!"
Harry jumped up. From the other side of the living room door there came sounds of the three Dursleys scrambling, panic-stricken, across the room. The next moment Dudley came flying into the hall, looking terrified. "What's happened?" said Harry. "What's the matter?" But Dudley didn't seem to be able to speak. His hands still clamped around his buttocks, he waddled as fast as he could into the kitchen. Harry hurried into the living room. Loud bangings and scrapings were coming from behind the Dursleys' boarded-up fireplace, which had a fake coal fire plugged up in front of it. "What is it?" gasped Aunt Petunia, who had backed into the wall and was staring terrified towards the fire. "What is it? What is it, Vernon?" But they were left in doubt barely a second longer. Voices could be heard from inside the blocked fireplace. "Oh, Fred, no! Go back, go back! There's been some kind of... George, no! Ow, ouch! George, no! There's no room! Go back quickly! Tell Ron!" "Maybe Harry can hear us, Dad. Maybe he'll be able to let us out." There was a loud hammering of fists on the boards behind the electric fire. "Harry! Harry! Can you hear us?" The Dursleys rounded on Harry like a pair of angry wolverines.
"What's this?"
growled Uncle Vernon.
"What's going on?"
They've tried to get here by flue powder," said Harry, fighting a mad desire to laugh. "They can travel by fire, only you've blocked the fireplace. Hang on." He approached the fireplace and called through the boards. "Mr. Weasley, can you hear me?" The hammering stopped. Somebody inside the chimney piece said, "Shh!" "Mr. Weasley, it's Harry. The fireplace has been blocked up. You won't be able to get through there." "Damn," said Mr. Weasley's voice. "What on earth do they want to block the fireplace up for?" "They've got an electric fire," Harry explained. "Really?" "Oh," said Mr. Weasley's voice excitedly. "Electric! You say with a plug? Precious, I must see that. Let's think. Ouch! Ron!" Ron's voice now joined the others. "What are we doing here? Something gone wrong?" "Oh, no," came Fred's voice sarcastically. "No, Ron, this is exactly where we wanted to end up." "Yeah, we're having the time of our lives here," said George, whose voice sounded muffled as though he was squashed against the wall. "Boys, boys, boys," said Mr. Weasley vaguely. "I'm trying to think what to do. Yeah, only way. Stand back, Harry." Harry retreated to the sofa. Uncle Vernon, however, moved forwards.
"Wait a moment!" he bellowed at the fire. "What exactly are you going to—" Bang!
The electric fire shot across the room as the boarded up fireplace burst outwards, expelling Mr. Weasley, Fred, George, and Ron in a cloud of rubble and loose chippings. Aunt Petunia shrieked and fell backwards over the coffee table. Uncle Vernon managed to catch her before she hit the floor and gaped speechlessly at the Weasleys, all of whom had bright red hair, including Fred and George, who of course were identical down to the last freckle.
"That's better,"
panted Mr. Weasley, brushing dust from his long green robes and straightening his glasses. "Ah, you must be Harry's aunt and uncle." Tall, thin, and balding, he moved towards Uncle Vernon, his hand outstretched. And there I'm going to stop.